skiing moguls, joking. Can't keep my edges. Shoom, shoom. Little hard to get good hip rotation. Cernan took a spectacular low-gravity tumble, landing unhurt in the deep, powdery soil. By the time they reached Van Surg crater, both men were exhausted. As Cernan and Schmidt approached, they had to drive the lunar rover through a field of football-sized rocks blasted out of the crater. Schmidt, the geologist, thought the rocks looked odd. "I'm not sure what's happened here yet," he said. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. There was no sign of the orange layer they were after. They parked the rover and picked their way through the debris field to stand on the rim, Schmidt arriving first. He described it for Houston. "This is at least a large, blocky rim crater, but even it has the mantle dust material covering the rim partially burying the rocks. And it's down on the floor, as near as I can tell, and on the walls. The crater itself has a central mound of blocks that's probably 50 meters in diameter. That's a little high. 30 meters in diameter." Cernan arrived. "Holy smoly," he said as he gazed into the visually striking crater. Schmidt went on. "The rocks are intensely shattered in that area, as are the ones that are on the walls. But as he looked around for orange soil, he saw none, just a lot of gray lunar rock, much of it in shatter cones caused by the force of the impact. It appeared to be an ordinary crater no more than 60 or 70 million years old." Mission Control was disappointed. Nevertheless, Schmidt and Cernan began collecting samples and putting them in numbered specimen bags. "These are very intensely fractured rocks," Schmidt said, handling a specimen. "And it comes off in small flakes. Let's get this one, because this will be the best-oriented one for documentation. Plus, why don't you get that one you've got inside there?" Cernan took a sample, and Schmidt picked up another rock in his scoop. "Got a bag?" "Bag 568. That's a corner, I think, off the block that Gene documented here." Schmidt held out another empty bag. "We'll get another sample that'll be from inside the block." "I can get it with the tongs real easy," Cernan replied. Schmidt cast his eye about and saw another sample that he wanted, a curious-looking rock about 10 inches long, shaped like a tablet. "We ought to take that just as is," he told Cernan, even though it was almost too big for a single sample bag. They picked it up with the tongs. "Let me hold this end," said Cernan as they tried to maneuver the specimen into the bag. "Let me hold it, and you put the bag on." Then he paused, looking closely. "Well, see that? See the white fragments in there?" He pointed to a number of white fragments embedded within the rock. "Yeah," said Schmidt, examining the spots closely. "You know, it might be that these might be pieces of the projectile. I don't know. 'Cause it doesn't look like... It's not subfloor. Okay, pin it down." When the rock was safely bagged, Schmidt asked, "What's the number?" "It's 480, responded Cernan, reading out the number printed on the side. Meanwhile, Houston had become impatient with the time being wasted at Van Surg, now that they had determined there wasn't any orange soil there. They asked Cernan to quit the crater and take some 500-millimeter photographs of North Massif, while Schmidt did a radial survey of the ejecta blanket surrounding Van Surg. By this time, Schmidt and Cernan had been out exploring for nearly 5 hours. Schmidt worked slowly, and during the survey his scoop broke. Dust problems again. Houston told him to forget the rest of the radial survey and prepare to close out the site. Back at the rover, they took one last gravimetric meeting and a final soil sample, did the closeout, and returned to the lunar module. The next day, Cernan and Schmidt lifted out of the Taurus Littrow Valley, becoming the last human beings, at least for now, to walk on the moon. Apollo 17 returned to Earth with a splashdown on December 19th, 1972. Lunar Sample 480 joined 842 pounds of other lunar rocks from the Apollo missions at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. 8 months later, with the end of the Apollo program, The Lunar Receiving Laboratory was closed, and its contents were transferred to a newly built, super high-tech facility at the Johnson Space Center called the Sample Storage and Processing Laboratory, or SSPL for short. Sometime during that 8-month period before the transfer of the moon rocks to the new SSPL, the rock known as Lunar Sample 480 vanished. Around the same time, all entries related to its discovery disappeared from the computer catalog and hard copy card files. Today, if you go to the SSPL and make a query to the Lunar Sample Registry database under the entry LS480, you will receive the following error message. Query: LS480. Illegal number, no such number. Please check lunar sample number and try again. Part 1. The Maze. Chapter 1. Stem Weathers scrambled to the top of the Mesa de los Viejos, tied his burro to a dead juniper, and settled himself down on a dusty boulder. Catching his breath, he mopped the sweat off his neck with a bandana. A steady wind blowing across the mesa top plucked at his beard, cooling him after the hot, dead air of the canyons. He blew his nose and stuffed the bandana back into his pocket. Studying the familiar landmarks, he silently recited the names: Daggett Canyon, Sundown Rocks, Navajo Rim, Orphan Mesa, Mesa del Yeso, Deadeye Canyon, Blue Earth, La Cuchilla, the Echo Badlands, the White Place, the Red Place, and Tyrannosaur Canyon. The closet artist in him saw a fantastical realm painted in gold, rose, and purple, but the geologist in him saw a set of Upper Cretaceous fault block plateaus, tilted, split, stripped, and scoured by time, as if infinity had laid waste to the earth, leaving behind a wreckage of garish rock. Weathers slipped a packet of Bull Durham out of a greasy vest pocket and rolled a smoke with gnarled, dirt-blackened hands, his fingernails cracked and yellow. Striking a wooden match on his pant leg, he fired up the Quirly and took in a long drag. For the past 2 weeks he had restricted his tobacco ration, but now he could splurge. All his life had been a prologue to this thrilling week. His life would change in a heartbeat. He'd patch things up with his daughter, Robbie, bring her here and show her his find. She would forgive him his obsessions, his unsettled life, his endless absences. The find would redeem him. He'd never been able to give Robbie the things that other fathers lavished on their daughters: money for college, a car, help with the rent. Now he'd free her from waiting tables at Red Lobster and finance the art studio and gallery she dreamed of. Weathers squinted up at the sun, 2 hours off the horizon. If he didn't get moving, he wouldn't reach the Chama River before dark. Salt, his burro, hadn't had a drink since morning, and Weathers didn't want a dead animal on his hands. He watched the animal dozing in the shade, its ears flattened back and lips twitching, dreaming some evil dream. Weathers almost felt affection for the vicious old brute. Weathers stubbed out his cigarette and slipped the dead butt into his pocket. He took a swig from his canteen, poured a little out onto his bandana, and mopped his face and neck with the cooling water. He slung the canteen over his shoulder and untied the burro, leading him eastward across the barren sandstone mesa. A quarter-mile distant, the vertiginous opening of Joaquin Canyon cut a spectacular ravine in the Mesa de los Viejos, the Mesa of the Ancients. Falling away into a complex web of canyons known as the Maze, it wound all the way to the Chama River. Weathers peered down. The canyon floor lay in blue shadow, almost as if it were underwater. Where the canyon turned and ran west, with Orphan Mesa on one side and Dog Mesa on the other, he spied 5 miles away the broad opening to the Maze. The sun was just striking the tilted spires and hoodoo rock formations marking its entrance. He scouted the rim until he found the faint, sloping trail leading to the bottom. A treacherous descent, it had landslided out in various places, forcing the traveler to navigate 1,000-foot drop-offs.